friends, my name is Emily and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be sharing with you a January 2023 wrap-up. I'm going to front load this video with the adult titles. I will timestamp everything in the description box down below with the children's lit grouped together under one timestamp at the end. I attempted to read 24 books this month. I DNF'd 2, meaning that 22 were read in their entirety. So we're going to start with From Bad to Cursed by Lana Harper. This is the second book in the Witches of Thistle Grove series. I did read these out of order, starting with the arc of the third in the series, Back in a Spell. It's set in this small magical town and we're following different characters from the founding families. This one is about Isidore Avamov, who's a necromancer, and she is being forced to investigate necromantic attacks against the Thorn family. They have green magic, so they're like really opposite sort of magics, life and death. And she's being forced to work together with her rival Rowan Thorn, and of course that is the enemies to lovers relationship that we're rooting for this whole time. The one thing that I will keep saying about these books is that they are a really nice transition piece from young adult to adult romance. They do have spicy scenes, they do have graphic scenes, but because Lana Harper, aka Lana Popovic, comes from a YA background, the scenes are definitely sexually explicit, but very focused on consent and female pleasure, and the love interest is not a bundle of red flags. So if your young reader is looking to bridge the gap between, say, those fade to black young adult romances and somebody like Tessa Bailey, this is a nice middle ground. Like, it definitely is intended for adults, but if you're gonna give a teen something spicy, this would be the place to go. I would say that the PIV sex part, that is the penis and vagina sex parts, are like very downplayed, which I think is nice compared to a lot of the adult romance that I've delved into, where it's definitely escapist fantasy intended for adult readers. Genitals in Tessa Bailey's book, for example, are very unrealistically large. At one point, there is a baseball player whose genitals are compared to a baseball bat in terms of size. I will say that part of me wishes that these books were just witchy fantasy. Like, there is so much happening in the Thistle Grove universe about the witches, about the founding of this place, the magic. Because I'm a reader that's looking to fill the gap that Harry Potter has left in my reread life, in light of J.K. Rowling's turfiness, I kind of wished that the romance wasn't here and that it filled that fantasy escapist aspect. Part of me just wants like a clearer divide. Like, I would like to go to romance when I want romance, and I would like to go to fantasy when I want this witchy world building stuff. This is definitely a blend of the two, and because I definitely lean more fantasy in terms of my interests, like, I enjoy the romance, I can appreciate the romance, but I find myself wishing for just straight fantasy without the romance aspect, and I know that that is not what this is. I didn't dock points for that. Depending on what you're looking for, a very cozy alternative, cozy grown-up alternative to the Harry Potter series, if you are also in the position that those books are no longer something that you are interested in, but if you are my age and sort of grew up on that series, this is a very queer, well, the series, not necessarily this book, but this series has queer rep, it's sex positive, it has interracial relationships, body positivity, different bodies being repped, and it is magical. The series has really grown on me. I am interested in the fourth in the series that is slated to come out in 2023. So I finished this on January 1st. I gave it 3.5 stars, I think 4 on Goodreads. I think I round up for Goodreads because Goodreads doesn't have the Storygraph half star feature. I borrowed this from the library. The second book that I read is also romance, and that is Delilah Green Doesn't Care by Ashley Herring Blake. This is the first book in the Bright Falls series. This is a sapphic romance story featuring Delilah, a lesbian photographer orphaned and raised in a home without love by her stepmother, and of course there is a step sibling. Her romantic interest is Claire, the bisexual best friend of Delilah's stepsister. It's like a Cinderella situation, right? Like, the father has died, Delilah was the unwanted stepchild in this home, felt very unwanted, never really formed a relationship with her stepsister Astrid, and so has left home and not had a lot of connection with those loose family ties. And Astrid invites Delilah home to be her wedding photographer. Delilah doesn't want to be a wedding photographer, but needs the money, needs a big paycheck that a wedding delivers. Because Delilah is photographing wedding events, Delilah gets to know Astrid's best friend Claire, flirt with her a little bit, and then, you know, they fall for each other. This was cute and steamy. The female friendships in it were great. What's drawing me into this and has me interested in this Bright Falls series is the female friendships. Like, this is what really kept me going back to Tessa Bailey. Despite the fact that Tessa Bailey's straight relationships, the male love interests are a bundle of red flags, like super possessive, icky, like definitely not my jam red flags. It's the female friendships in the series. Like, so the series sort of centers around a group of women who are entering into these problematic straight relationships, or like icky feeling straight relationships. This has that core female friendship, and the relationship that I have seen here, the sapphic relationship here, is healthy, a good the bar is so low. I'm just like, it's a healthy sapphic relationship. Wow. It's a healthy romance. Wow. And that is entirely my fault in terms of just picking off like the low-hanging fruit, the high profile titles that you see on book tables, book talk, bookstagram. As I explore this genre more, I find the elements of romance that I really enjoy, the healthy relationships, the core female friendship that's really strong, that's being built here. So I love this. I love what Ashley Herring Blake is setting up in this Bright Falls series. I'm here for it. I'm excited for the next book. I'm borrowing all of the romance from the library, full disclosure, because I'm not really sure what I like. So if you're also looking to sort of explore, step in, put this on your library holds list. I do feel like it's worth it. I finished this on January 8th. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I borrowed it from the library, and I did borrow it on audio because that was the format that my library had available. I attempted to read The Golden Enclaves by Naomi Novik. This is the 3rd installment in the Shullamancers series. This is my first DNF of the year. This series had promise. Again, I'm looking to fill that void of Harry Potter. That was the appeal of this Shullamancers series by Novik. And I gobbled up the first book, heard the criticism of the first book. When I went into the second book, was very aware of that criticism. It's a lot of information dumping, really boring monologues from our protagonist that you would hope would stop for the 3rd book, because the thing that they are information dumping, this stupid fucking school, doesn't play a role in this book in the same way. Yet we are still information dumping about buildings that we will never see again. It fell apart. Like, it really fell apart. So I got 52% of the way into the book from the library, and it just wasn't working. I wasn't having fun. And so I looked up some Goodreads reviews, and it doesn't get any better. I found myself 52% of the way in being like, what is the story here? Like, there doesn't appear to be a story. There's like an encyclopedia on this world, on these schools, on this magic system, but there's no story. Like, somebody else could take this and write really amazing fan fiction with a really great plot using the world that Novik has built, but not actually written a story in. Like, the story is like candy floss. It's nothing. It has no substance. The characters have no substance, but the world is there. And like, that's what had me coming back, was I kept hoping that Novik would actually play with her characters in this world that she'd built. And she doesn't. I don't feel bad. I got 52% of the way into the third book in this series and DNF'd it. Like, I promised myself I would be a little bit more ruthless, a little bit more careful with my time this year, and so I feel very happy that on January 10th, I took this borrowed copy from the library and DNF'd it. Then I got to my second DNF. This was unfortunate. So I requested access to an advanced reader copy of Infamous by Lex Croucher through NetGalley in exchange for an honest review, and I was granted access to that copy. I was really looking forward to this. I read Reputation by Lex Croucher and I enjoyed it. I thought it was a lot of fun. I thought it had a lot of promise considering it was their debut, and I was excited for this next book, which is about Eddie, who is sort of like Eloise Bridgerton from the show, if you've watched Bridgerton. She's like Eloise Bridgerton, like cranked up to 1,000, with Jo March's literary aspirations. Personally, I find Eloise really abrasive as a character in Bridgerton. I do not enjoy her. Starting off on sort of a foot where it's like, oh, this isn't my favorite type of character. I find her difficult to like already. And then the writing here felt too full of adjectives, if that makes sense. And I think it's in trying to establish this quirky narrative voice for Eddie that Croucher introduces like a lot of what feels like unnecessary adjectives to make the writing, to make the narrative voice of Eddie quirky, like the quirky girl. I think it was supposed to be funny. Like, I think if you bought into Eddie as a character, you would have found that narrative voice funny. I already found the character archetype for Eddie sort of grating, and so the quirky narrative voice really got on my nerves. I was not enjoying myself, and so at 30%, I feel like I gave the book a fairly decent shot at 30%. I did decide to DNF this e-arc. I am not writing off Croucher as an author. They have another work coming out. Something in art are not in love, because again, when I looked on Goodreads, there were a lot of folks in my position who were like, oh, I loved Reputation, this didn't work for me. Or I loved Infamous, but Reputation didn't work for me. So this is to say, give it a shot. If you're thinking about it, if you see it on a bookstore table, read the first few pages, see if that narrative voice works for you and you find it funny, and if not, try Reputation. The next book that I read and finished is Fairy Tale by Stephen King. I actually read this twice this month because the Red Rum Book Club, the patron exclusive book club, discussed this together at the end of the month. The first time I read this was just for shits and giggles. The second time was to think critically about it. So this is his latest work, and I was really, really excited for this one. This is following 17-year-old Charlie Reed through acts of caregiving, acts of service to a very crotchety elderly man named Mr. Bowditch and his dog Radar. Charlie ends up inheriting the keys to this other world called Empis. And while Charlie's there, he ends up sucked into this battle of good versus evil to help save Empis from the Flight Killer, who has put a curse on the land and made everybody gray. For like the fun part of this was full of Easter eggs, both to King's own works and to other literary works, which is fun. If you're one of those readers who loves moments of intertext, this is great. In the live, we did get to talk a lot about the fairy tale references, how they had been transformed or not in King's reviving of them in this dark fairy tale. Then when you turn on your critical brain, there are some ableist ideas built into the very logic and climax of this plot. The gray is a disfiguring curse. It results in like the melting of human bodies so that folks are disfigured and acquiring disabilities as their fingers and toes sort of fuse together, as their skin melts and they lose the ability to see and speak. Spoiler alert, this engages with the controversial and highly critiqued trope of the magical or miracle cure. I don't really know how much of a spoiler that is because this is a fairy tale. It's so formulaic. It's expected to have a happy ending, and so expected happy ending of fairy tales is that the disfigurement or disability is cured, because the ableist idea is that I guess authors can't imagine disabled and disfigured folks living happy lives, and so the happy ending therefore has to cure that. Now, it is a partial cure, but I don't know how much that matters. It's, well, it doesn't entirely replicate the cure. Like, the curse stops progressing and pulls back a little bit without healing everybody entirely. There is a concerning moment at the end where a really pivotal character talks about how because she is disfigured, she will never find love, and she's gonna do her duty as queen, and like her royal blood will draw in a man to make a baby even if he never loves her, never finds her attractive. The climax of this book also reiterates how important words and wordplay are in fairy tales. If words matter so much, here is a book of words that replicates the idea, reasserts the idea that the happiest ending that we could imagine for these disabled and disfigured characters is a magical cure, opposed to a recognizing that society is disabling individuals. It's a failure to imagine the possibilities, right? Fantasy is a literature of subversion. As long as it is consistent within the rules of the world, it can be done. You have a disabled and disfigured ruler at the end of this book, and instead of imagining what somebody in that position might do to restructure society for her disabled and disfigured subjects, we have a magical cure that sort of functions in the same way that the medical model of disability does, in that the magic fixes, huge scare quotes around that, fixes the individual body so that it functions in the existing society pre-curse, compared to the social model of disability that recognizes that it is society that is creating these disabling experiences. And we now have a ruler who has that lived experience, who could radically change the fantasy space, the secondary world space that she lives in. So it's a failure of imagination in fairy tale that ends up reasserting this really ableist idea that a happy ending is a return to a able-bodied, like more normative standard of beauty appearance. When you turn your brain on, it's a little icky. I actually didn't know how to give this a star rating. When I turned my brain off, this book is like candy. I could see myself rereading this over and over again because it has the skeleton of the fairy tale. Stephen King is a pantser. He doesn't know where he's going with his plot, and endings sometimes just implode before my eyes, and a book that I really loved, characters that I really loved, just are ruined by a pantser ending. And because the structure of a fairy tale has a very set skeleton on which King is able to lay the flesh of his story, the ending is quite satisfying. The plot points are quite satisfying, and I love the experience of it when I turn my brain off. When I turn my brain back on and I look at, like, what is this piece doing for readers? I have problems with it. I'm giving you this information. Do with it what you will. I finished this on January 15th. This came from my TBR, and I read the physical copy of this. In preparation for that live show, I reread Disfigured by Amanda Leduc. Amanda Leduc does identify as disabled, and she is very familiar with folk and fairy stories, and so this text is part memoir, part informal exploration of fairy tales and the representation of disfigurement and disability in fairy tales. She's very explicit at the beginning that this is not intended to be scholarly, although it does pull on scholarly works. It is very accessible, it is very personal. It's also chronicling her own experience as a disabled person that has experienced medicalization and medicine's treatment and engagement with disfigured and disabled bodies. And she talks about how it has impacted her that villains are outwardly marked as disabled or disfigured, that a villain's ugliness on the outside is supposed to tell readers about how ugly they are on the inside. What does that do? Like, if you identify more with the beast than with the princess, and you have to change for love, the beast has to turn back into a prince to have his happy ending. She talks about what that's like. She also talks about the magical cure. This, I thought, provided me a lot of food for thought for thinking through what was sort of bothering me about Fairy Tale by Stephen King. I would highly recommend it as a read either way if you're interested in disability rep, if you're interested in fairy tales, if you are a reader of Fairy Tale by Stephen King and like want to maybe interrogate the disability and disfigured rep in there. I would highly recommend it. I finished that on January 17th. I gave it 4 to 5 stars and it was a reread. Then I read, again, in preparation for the live show, Fairy Tale, A Very Short Introduction by Marina Warner. So the very short introductions are put out by Oxford University Press. They either serve as like an introductory piece, so like if you want to learn about something, they give you a really nice, accessible window into the history, the scholarship that's gone on there in an accessible way. It's a refresher if it's something that you've studied before. It also gives you a really great list of sources if you are starting somewhere. So if you're starting a project on like paganism, you could get the very short introduction on paganism and get your little crash course, but then also take that bibliography at the back and explore further like peer-reviewed scholarly sources, which is very valuable. Very much enjoy that about these. Overall, I was really pleased with it as a refresher. It's been a while since I've studied fairy tales in an academic space. It was in my master's, which is horrifyingly approaching almost a decade ago. I was glad for the refresher. I finished that on January 17th. I gave it 3 to 5 stars. It's an academic book. It's not gonna be like fun, but it is useful. Following my no-buy rules, I ordered Hellbent by Leigh Bardugo, which is the second book in a series. So here we are following Alex Stern trying to rescue her mentor Darlington from hell. It's hard because it's a sequel. It's a sequel to Ninth House, right? And I really enjoyed Ninth House. I've heard a lot of people being like, nah, this doesn't work for me. Like, Leigh Bardugo's young adult stuff works for a lot of people. It's quite popular, but a lot of people didn't enjoy Ninth House. I haven't read any of Leigh Bardugo's young adult works, but I did really enjoy Ninth House. So I don't know if that means anything. It is about death magic, necromancy, like the less cute, fluffy magic of Lana Harper's Thistle Grove Witches. This is like the dark death, blood sacrifice, find a recently deceased corpse, ghosts everywhere, journey to hell, demons sort of magic. It is taking place on Yale's campus. I guess reimagines some of Yale's secret societies that actually do exist as darker and deadlier. I really enjoyed getting back into this world. I will say that given that there's a little bit of a mystery, a puzzle that's supposed to be solved here, I feel like it all wraps up a little too neatly. I know that this is fiction and that everything here is here by design, but it's almost a little too convenient that all of the disparate pieces of like the shit that's happening on campus will all come together and fit like perfectly like puzzle pieces. I feel like a good mystery needs some red herrings, and like some things came completely out of left field. Like I don't think there was any textual proof to indicate one of the reveals, and I don't know how I feel about that. I'm interested enough to read the third book, but I'm probably going to borrow it because I can see this falling apart fairly quickly. If it's not executed well. Let's say that. My worry is that it's going to end up like The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, the Netflix series, where the first season I was like, wow, that has a lot of promise. Like I love how like dark and like not funny this take of Sabrina the Teenage Witch is. And then it got ludicrous. It got absolutely bananas. I'm worried that Ninth House was like that first season of Sabrina that sucked me in. And Hellbent, I can see it falling apart a little bit. I'm worried that the series is just gonna go like banana pants, like become absolute nonsense. So I will read the third book, but I will borrow the third book. I finished this on January 22nd. I gave this 3 stars. This was a new buy. I reread Fairy Tale. We already talked about Fairy Tale. The final physical book that I read this month was Emma by Jane Austen. So my voting patrons each month are voting based on a prompt. I have 2 books to help me tackle my TBR, and so the prompt for January was a book with a film adaptation, and I was gonna read the book and watch the film. Emma by Jane Austen won. I have never read Emma before. My intention with this was to mostly watch the 2020 adaptation, and then I realized how many adaptations of Emma there are, and I've now watched 2. And based on listening to other people's reviews, I'm interested in 2 other film adaptations. Emma Woodhouse has made one match successfully and fancies herself a matchmaker, so she takes on this girl of unknown birth, Harriet, to sort of raise in society. I feel like she takes on this project. From the book, I feel like I was quite uncharitable with Emma. She's a snob. She is classist. She is judgy. She can be quite cruel. And I found very little redeeming about her from the book. But then I've watched 2 adaptations that have taken some of these like direct words and just in how various actresses have played these moments or how these situations were set up and people reacted to them, I'm come away with a slightly more understandable or relatable picture of Emma. Also, depending on how much of a wet blanket Harriet is portrayed as, depends on how much I like Emma. I thought about making an entire video dedicated to this, but I don't know if I know enough about Emma and Jane Austen. Like, this is very much out of my comfort zone as an academic. I did not do this area of literature beyond the mandatory courses. Like, I don't feel very qualified, like, other than being like, as a layperson here who has read the book and then watched a couple of different adaptations, like, certain things work better to my 2023 consumer eyes than others. So I appreciated the challenge. I don't read a lot of older stuff. I don't tend to leave the 1900s all that often. Like, I think the 2020 adaptation is my favorite. I liked that they introduced the flirtation between Emma and Mr. Knightley fairly early on. Like, the book makes it almost seem like once Harriet expresses an interest in Mr. Knightley that Emma's like, no wait, Mr. Knightley's mine. Like, the way I read it, it came off a little bit more like petty and greedy, whereas the films, especially the 2020 film, introduced this sort of like a friendly banter between them to begin with, and then there's like this moment where Emma can see Mr. Knightley approaching the house, and so she goes to sit down at her piano and she like makes herself pretty at her piano and she's playing something really beautiful when he comes in to be like, oh, look at me, notice me. And then when he doesn't come and comment on her, then she joins the group. Like, the movie did a better job of making her look interested in him, vaguely romantically, earlier on, and I found that made her more charitable, because in the book, when Harriet's like, oh no, you misunderstand me, like, I like Mr. Knightley, not Mr. There are too many misters, the dipshit that flirted with Emma but was already engaged to Jane Fairfax. It makes Emma look really petty, at least in the book for me, and really classist when Harriet's like, oh no, you misunderstand me. Like, you've been telling me to reach high, and I'm reaching high for the guy who was really nice to me, who when nobody would dance to me, danced with me. Emma's like, oh my God, how dare Harriet reach so high? Like, I told her to reach high, but not that high. Like, oh my God, right? And it makes her look like a really bad friend. Whereas 2020, I think, makes her look, it makes that reaction of like, oh shit, Harriet likes Mr. Knightley. Oops, I like Mr. Knightley. Feel better? So far that's my favorite. I do still want to watch the 1996 with Gwyneth Paltrow. I've watched the 1996 made-for-TV movie, and then I've also heard things about the 2009 BBC miniseries. I've heard good things about that portrayal of Emma. So overall, I think it's a win. Got a book off my TBR that I've been meaning to read for a while, and have got to see various people's interpretations of it that has sort of shaped my relationship to the character of Emma. I finished that on January 30th. I gave the book 3 out of 5 stars. That came from my TBR. So those are all of the adult books. Before we go and transition into all of the children's books, picture books, I just wanted to highlight this year I am hosting a horror book club themed around the haunted house. And on February 28th at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I will be hosting the first discussion for that book club live on YouTube, and that will be on The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. I feel like this is a really great starting point for looking at the haunted house, and we're going to build off of that throughout the year. I will leave a video linked where I talk about the 6 books that we'll be exploring together this year, and hopefully making some connections with now that they're all under one theme. So if you are interested in that, check out the video. Consider subscribing and clicking the bell so that you do get a notification when that live does happen. Let's talk about the children's books that I read this month for The Secret Project. So the first piece of children's lit that I would like to highlight for you is Amy Wu and the Ribbon Dance by Kat Zhang and Charlene Chua. This is a really beautiful picture book. So Amy Wu loves to move, she just can't keep still, and when she sees Chinese ribbon dancing, she has to try it. And she throws a dance party with all of her friends, and the only problem with this is that her DIY ribbons aren't quite right, and so it's about her, you know, working that out. This is so cute. The illustrations are so cute, and there are activities at the back to make your own dancing ribbon, which I think are very fun. So if you have a little person in your life, this is a picture book, so we're looking ages 3 to 6. If you have a little person in your life that like relates to not being able to sit still, likes to wiggle, likes to move, this could be a fun book to read with them and then do the activity of making the dancing ribbons and having a little dance party. Finished that on January 11th. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Then I read I Am Big by Itah Sadu and Marley Barreau. This is about a young black hockey player who he finds joy in his talent. He's great at hockey, but he also has to face down a lot of microaggressions from white parents who see him as a threat because he is tall for his age and black. I think it's valuable to see a young black boy who is dealing with these microaggressions at the picture book level, like at a level that is appropriate for 3 to 6 year olds to understand what this looks like. I like the way that this has been presented and addressed. The illustrations, again, are really cute. Overall, I think it's really well put together. I like the work that Sadu is doing. I think the hockey aspect is interesting as well. Like, I don't tend to read a lot of sports books, but for your sports lovers, here's a hockey book that isn't like the good old hockey game. So this I finished on January 11th. I gave 4 to 5 stars. Then I read Dear Dandelion by S.J. OKemow. So this is a love letter to the dandelion. So the dandelion is a non-native plant that was brought to Turtle Island in the mid-1600s by Europeans. What this book is a testament to a living culture, a language that is living and developing, because obviously the word for dandelion developed when the plant was brought over with the Europeans. It's a testament to this language that is continuing to adapt, to live. That's the point, living. You can eat dandelions. I think that's why they were brought over, because they're hardy and you can eat them. And so the dandelion is considered a weed, and it was brought over by white people to begin with, and then it went wild. Now you have like the stereotype of the white person spraying the living shit out of their lawn to get rid of all the dandelions, to root out this weed, but yet the dandelion persists, and what a metaphor that is. It's the resilience. She's celebrating the resilience of this weed as well, because settler colonials did attempt and continue to attempt to root out the peoples who were here first, the indigenous peoples, and they are still here. They are still planting roots and growing and living, and the language reflects that, right? Like, it is a gorgeous book, absolutely beautiful, just in terms of like the illustrations, gorgeous, but the messaging as well, so good. Finished that on January 11th. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. So then I read We Belong to the Drum by Sandra Lamouche and Azby Whitecalf. I changed how I started taking notes here. This is a picture book from Orca Book Publishers that is coming out on May 16th, 2023. This is another dual language book where we have a mix of English and Plains Cree on the page. It is the story of Nicosis feeling safe and accepted at daycare after the caregivers share powwow music. He gets to share the powwow music that he loves with his friends at daycare. Whitecalf's illustrations are gorgeous. They are two-spirit, and they produce these really bold, textured, colorful illustrations that are just such a pleasure to look at. I'm big on illustrations. I'm big on really grabby art, and I love their work. I finished this on January 13th. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. Then I read And JJ Slept by Loretta Garbutt and Erika Rodriguez Medina. So this picture book was published by Kids Can Press in 2022, so it is out and available. It is about JJ. He is this new baby who's adopted into this already quite large, I'm guessing, how do you want to, a found family? Like a built family. Just on how the illustrations are done, we see the kids are different races, and JJ has been adopted in as well. And so it's about how like this noisy house full of life and siblings and family is what puts JJ to sleep, having this like noise of like love surrounding him. And then the one day all the kids leave, they all have activities and they all go off into the world, and the house is dead silent, and the parents struggle to get JJ to sleep because the house is too quiet for him to sleep. I really like the adoption aspect because a lot of kids are adopted. I don't know that I can name a picture book from my childhood that had a family in which children were adopted. Maybe that's just not what was sought out by my parents, but like, I like that this has an alternate way that a family can come together in it. The illustrations are really cute. And I mean, the concept is just kind of silly and fun that like JJ likes a noisy house. Yeah, I finished on January 13th. I gave 4 to 5 stars. Then I read Hopscotch by Marie-Louise Gay. This picture book is coming out from Groundwood, and its publication date is for August 1st, 2023. We have a girl named Ophelia who imagines the neighbor's dog Jackson needs help and dreams of rescuing him and becoming best friends. And then one day Jackson is gone, and Ophelia's family have to move again for her dad's work, and she worries about how her imaginary best friend Jackson will ever find her again. Surprise! Her family moved her to a place where they speak French, and she doesn't speak French, so she's feeling very isolated at school. So it's about learning to adapt to a new school and a new home. This felt a little disjointed to me. If you think about all of the parts that I just told you, like, it starts with a girl imagining this dog that she always sees outside is her friend and like needs to be brought into the house and become her friend, and ends with her in a French school not understanding French It did not go where I expected it to go. Not that any of it was bad necessarily, like lots of kids get uprooted to follow their parents' work. I think that the idea of meeting new friends, new classmates can be scary. A lot of kids do come into spaces not having the language of their peers and have to adapt really quickly. It just didn't capture me in any way. I finished this on January 13th. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. Then I read Skating Wild on the Inland Sea by Jean E. Penzewell and Todd Stewart. So this is another picture book from Groundwood. It has a publication date of October 3rd, 2023. The illustrations here are striking. It's this blue and white color palette with very limited use of orange and yellow, and it really captures like a bright day after it snowed in the winter. In like, if you know, you know those days where it's like blinding, the sun reflecting off the snow, the sky is so blue. Like, the limited color palette here is gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. So you really get like the feeling of what it would be like cold and crisp walking through the woods to skate on Lake Superior, which is what this book is about. I mean, as like a wintry read, because it's coming out in October as a wintry read, I'm really looking forward to this. So I finished that on January 13th. I gave that 4 out of 5 stars. Then I read The Invitation by Stacey May Fowles, illustrated by Marie LaFrance. This is another book from Groundwood, and their publication date is April 4th, 2023. The illustrations are textured and a tad surreal. It's kind of interesting to look at, but the color palette is fairly muted. So this is about Fern, who has an anxious spiral about everything that could go wrong on their way to the special event she's been invited to. And her friend, the fawn, comes up with solutions to put her at ease, and eventually she has fun at the event. It almost reminds me a little bit of like the, if you give a mouse a cookie, he will probably put it in some milk. And if you give him some milk, he will probably, like, it's that, it's an anxiety spiral. It truly is an anxiety spiral represented on page with this weird surrealist plant lady as our main character. If you have an anxious person, this could be very relatable. Maybe because it's too real. I am often in the position of this weird surrealist plant where I'm like, but what if the house explodes? So I finished that on January 3rd. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. Then I read Robot Unicorn Queen by Shannon Brammer and Irene Luxbacher. So this was a poetry collection from Groundwood. This is coming out on October 3rd, 2023. It's exploring childhood experiences in poetry. It's an invitation for kids to see potential for play with language. It's definitely very whimsical and surreal. It's fun to look at. It's not my jam, but I could definitely see some folks really enjoying how strange these are. I finished that on January 13th. I gave that 3 out of 5 stars. Then I read Malika Carnival Queen by Nadia L. Hone, illustrated by Irene Lubacher. This is another picture book from Groundwood with a pub date of May 2nd, 2023. So Grandma has decided that it's time for Malika to learn about her deceased father. Her father was a migrant worker who dreamed of celebrating Carnival just like back home. It is inspired by one of Holmes' grandparents, who was a migrant worker and who died while working on a farm. The illustrations for this are beautiful as well. I finished this on January 13th. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Then I read Sometimes I Feel Like a River by Danielle and illustrated by Josie Bizalio. This is being published by Groundwood Books. Its publication date is March 7th of 2023, and it is 12 short poems. A child tells us why they feel like various things in nature. I think you can tell, like, based on my descriptions of these things, like whether or not it was my jam or not. This is not really my jam. I could again see this working for certain readers. I am not that reader. I finished this on January 13th. I think in terms of like the execution, the whole package, this is a 4 out of 5 star read for me. Then I read The Remembering Stone by Carrie Sukachev. This is a picture book from Groundwood Books. coming out on March 7th, 2023. So Alice loses a skipping stone that she's been given by her grandfather. Her grandfather was trying to teach her to skip stones, and shortly before, like the last time they were together, he gave her this flat rock, and it's like her Undenken. It's the thing that she has to remember him, and she brings it to school for show and tell, and then she loses it, and everybody, her whole class, helps her to try and look for it, and in the end they don't find it. They find a lot of other rocks, and she learns that there are other ways to remember people than like that one physical object that like ties to a moment, and like the love that her classmate showed her in trying to find this object to remember her grandfather is like a really happy moment that was tied to this sort of, I guess, melancholy rock. The color palette of this is muted given that it is a book about grief. I think for the right reader, a 3 to 6 year old reader who has maybe lost somebody, this could be a gentle book for them to sort of come at grief on a corner. I finished this on January 13th. I gave it 4 to 5 stars. Then I read City of Neighbors by Andrea Curtis and Irene Lubacher. This is a nonfiction book with pictures. Again, I think targeting younger folks, definitely not middle grade. I think your 9 to 12-year-old. Your 12-year-old would definitely be insulted. Your 7 to 8-year-old, probably this is the targeted audience. Somebody who's reading by themselves, but not somebody who would be into a book that is more text than pictures. Like, this is pictures with more text than you would read out loud to a kid. It's an early reader. That's who it is. So this is coming out from Groundwood. The publication date for this is May 2nd, 2023. This is about placemaking, when citizens are experts on where they live and know best how to make where they live a nice community space. It's focusing on that. It's like a child-friendly strong towns theory book, and it is the 4th in a Think City series looking at strong towns in a child-accessible way. So if you are into like Not Just Bikes, Climate Town, those YouTube channels that are looking at city planning, at climate change, this is like the child-friendly version of it. The illustrations are beautiful. This I finished on January 16th. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. The final book I have here for the Secret Project is The Gift of Menumen by Brittany Lubby and Joshua Mangashig Passus Steckley. So this is a picture book from Groundwood with a pub date of October 3rd, 2023. This is dual language, so we have Anishinaabe and English. It's talking about how a seed is a story that you can hold in your hand. So we're looking at how an ecosystem in balance all works together. The illustrations in this are beautiful. I mean, on the surface, it's about like harvesting seeds respectfully, but it's very much looking at how we interact with our environment and how we should interact with our environment. And when we are doing that in a respectful way, like everything works. I think this is a beautiful package if you are thinking about the environment again with your young person. I finished this on January 18th. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Those are all of the books that I read this month. I want to thank you all so much for watching. If you stuck around to the end, leave me a, what have we talked a lot about? Sprout, a plant sprout emoji in the comments down below, and let me know your thoughts on these books. Did I spark your interest in any of these books, especially the picture books that have upcoming releases? Thank you to my patrons who make videos like this possible. I really appreciate the work that they enable me to do. The next video that you are going to see is a small book haul video that comes from the pocket money that Patreon provides me, so stay tuned for that. If you are interested in becoming a patron, a link to the Patreon page is in the description box down below, and it really does help fund things for the channel. Thank you, patrons. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you are doing well, that you are staying safe, and I will see you soon with another video. Bye!